Going on? This is Josh recording live from Earth.
This is Michael in Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Yo, what's good? This is Jesse from Oakland, California.
What's up, everybody? This is Marvin here, coming from West Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and welcome, folks, if you are listening to an interesting episode of the Melanated Social Work Podcast, because we are actually going to talk about our proposal for South by Southwest. As always, you can listen to the Melanated Social Work Podcast on all major streaming platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever the hell else you listen to podcasts. Also, you can follow us on Instagram at Melanated Social Work. So today we really wanted to talk about this proposal idea, and the question that the topic that we're talking about is how your mental health can save the nation. And so right now we are at a time where there's a lot of political divisiveness. There's a lot of social justice, or social justice is becoming more and more prevalent in our nation. People are kind of searching for what America is and what America means, because it's shifting. We keep hearing about this idea of we are battling for the soul of America, and I think that mental health can play a very, very significant role in how we do save this nation. So what do y'all think?
I mean, yeah. Marcus Garvey said, "A people without the knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without its own roots. And finding your roots can be rooted to finding the right mental health healing that you need." Marcus Garvey also said, "If you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life." And then Marcus Garvey also said, "Liberate the minds." He says of men, but I'm going to say people. "Liberate the minds of people, and ultimately you will liberate the bodies of people." So I just think that mental liberation to get you through that BS job that you don't really like, that you're trying to get towards your goals, being able to find a place of wellness to provide for your family, to provide for yourself. I mean, that starts with your mind. Like, people don't know that many athletes, like Kobe Bryant, he would meditate like 15 minutes a day. We're talking about mental wellness and the liberation that it provides. Big Sean on his most recent album had said that he learned about all these other subjects, but not how to deal with his anxiety, and that he meditates daily. So, it doesn't have to necessarily be therapy when we're going to be pressing that, but it's meditation, it's prayer, it's journaling, it's connecting with community. These are all the things that, we can do to support mental health. Our brother Jesse always talks and has educated us on, community self-care, right? It's one thing, like, American identities are founded in what I can do for myself to help my mental health. But, we come from Black and Indigenous populations in which it's all about the village that raises each other and is there for each other. So we just try to support the wellness of, ourselves, but also of our communities, so that the world is in a different place and you're able to process any privilege that you have, any transgressions that you've had, to reconcile something that you've done that's a flaw, that's on of moral character, moral injury to your character, moral injury to those who you've afflicted. And also that if you have been trespassed against, you can use, therapy as a sense in mental healing to reconcile. Because if, you can get stuck in a rut and not forgive somebody else, and it's just weighing down you and the people that, are around you. So it's about those things, and just taking responsibility for a overall communal and holistic way of mental health, with therapy and without therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
I
Just
mean,
say some. Go ahead.
yeah, that's hella real, Josh. And just like, I take for granted sometimes, like, just our perspective, and like how that maybe I assume that other people think and move this way, but how much of that is influenced by us being like 4 men of color operating within therapy, and it stands to name that, like, the large majority of therapists in the world are white women. And so obviously like their lived experience and how they approach this work is just going to be intrinsically different. And we are in like the like DEI moment of this nation. Like everyone is like, okay, cool, we're ready to accept that like shit is hella racist, and like what are we gonna do about it? And like us as like facilitators and like educators, like I'm just at a point where I'm done with folks being like, I'm listening and learning. Like, how the fuck long have you been listening and learning for? Like, let's actually do something about this. You know what I mean? I think overwhelmingly within like the field of mental health, people have really like stuck to individualizing people's problems. If you are depressed, if you are anxious, if you are suffering from trauma, this is somehow like your fault. This is somehow like something that you did wrong in your life. And there's so much shame and guilt associated with that, that I think, you know, particularly in speaking towards like communities of color, there's a lot of silencing around that. And a lot of folks don't actually get the help that they need. And I think through our work, like what we've been trying to do is really trying to just link and connect for folks the history of racism within this nation, how that links to the intergenerational trauma, particularly that like communities of color have experienced. And then how does that trauma connect back to the mental health experience and wellness of individuals and communities? That the reality is that any person of color in this country experiencing some level of anxiety right now, some level of like disconnection, some level of depression, whatever it is, that to heal that, we individually and as a nation and collectively have to acknowledge how that's connected to white supremacy and how that's perpetuated through every institution in our nation and globally, you know, for that matter. And so I think like that's our work to support folks of color in that healing. And it's also like our work to name that for white folks, because they need to do that healing as well. Like there are ways in which that the system of white supremacy has impacted the psyche of white folks and impacted the way that they move throughout the world. And so for the sake of like saving their own humanity, it is like essential that they are also engaged in this like, you know, journey of healing their mental health and their psyche.
Yo, you brought up so many excellent points, and I think about the power of naming things. And Jesse, you're the one who hit me to saying you say white supremacy at least once every day. Like it just helps to sort of explain the world that we're living in. And if we can normalize that and allow others to understand, like, what does that actually mean? We can start to take away some of its power, because we're bringing awareness to how we're all trying to operate. And the current moment is toxic on every level, every business sector, every institution that we try to navigate disenfranchises Black and brown people. And when folks don't have the language to know what's going on, but just accepting the systems as they are, that people are going to continue to suffer. And through that suffering, like anxiety, depression, other mental health illnesses will manifest. And then again, I'm just to reiterate, like there is that culture of suffering in silence, because there's a stigma of like, oh, there might be something wrong with you. But it's like, no, my body's just having a really natural reaction to the environment that I'm trying to survive and thrive in. And this environment isn't cultivating wellness for me. And there is a huge duality, or a substantial duality, between the individual care and the community care. Y'all heard me say earlier, Gil Scott Heron said the revolution will not be televised, because the revolution is going to happen in your mind. And I think about what's our role as therapists, as facilitators and educators, as you said, Jesse, to help guide people to their own mental revolution. Josh, you were naming Marcus Garvey for a few quotes, and again, that mindset of it starts with self, and if we can take care of ourselves, then we can show up for other people. And there's just, again, I think about that duality of it all. But yeah, y'all already named so many important things that I'm like, I'm excited as we get going here. I'm like, yeah, let's break it down.
Yeah, as you were talking, and Mike and Jesse as well, you know, there's this idea that we have to um, that there's the idea that mental health is gonna save us, right? But then I think that more specifically, I think that there has to be a shift to politicize mental health, and what that basically means is like in the if we're talking about in the therapy session, and let's say there's a white client and a white therapist, and they talk about depression, and then that's it. Like that's not gonna necessarily shift kind of our nation. But when we integrate into social work school or into psychology school. I don't know what psychology school is called, but whatever they do. But if we make it so that therapists are making it a point to talk about empathy, to talk about white supremacy, and to really do that work, because some of the battles that we are still fighting are we're still having to prove that white supremacy is actually a thing to other white folks, because a lot of them just don't believe it, right? And so we can scream it as much as we can, but if their white therapist is like, oh yeah, this is actually a real thing, like how does that affect you? It'll hit a little bit differently, and I think it'll cause almost a ripple effect, because in therapy sessions, whether group, individual, couples, whatever, typically there's like a light bulb that comes on. And when you have a light bulb that comes on, hopefully folks are sharing this with their communities, with their circles, right? And so like then we have this effect where like, oh, I learned this thing from my therapist, I'm going to talk to my friends about it, I'm going to talk to my parents about it, I'm going to talk to my neighbors, my coworkers about it. And hopefully there can that ripple effect and that shift can start. I mean, on the flip side, we have a lot of people of color, a lot of black folks that are holding a lot of things inside, which make us react in certain ways, which make us react to trauma in certain ways, which can be harmful to individuals, to communities, and kind of the overall society, right? And so I think that for various different groups, mental health can be significant in shifting the culture in America right now.
Mm-hmm. Yo, you got me thinking about, like, if you are meeting with a therapist and that therapist hasn't done the work to like decolonize their mind, like how harmful that can be. If you're a black or brown person meeting with a white therapist or a non-POC therapist, well, that would be white. And thinking about how that, like, there's harm that can be created in that space by thinking, whatever presenting problem you're communicating, your therapist might think it is like such an individual task for you to try to get right, and not encourage you or be aware of the larger community that you're a part of to also cultivate that wellness. So yeah, that you got me thinking about just on a micro level,
Yeah.
like how deep it goes.
I'm thinking about these Bible Belt states as well, and it's like a lot of them are anti anything to do with outside of heterosexuality, right? And so you have a therapist who believes the same thing. The client who's like, yeah, my son is gay. The therapist's like, oh yeah, let's send him to a conversion camp, right? So that's not progressive. Like that's not helping us at all, right? And so if we have therapists who have this training and have this understanding and have you know the knowledge to, I'll say, gently shift client thinking, or gently shift the conversation into a way in which it's like, okay, I'm giving you education now, more around society, then I think the conversation and the therapeutic alliance is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a sneak peek of what we would be talking about for South by Southwest. Obviously, we can go for hours and hours talking about this stuff, but mental health would most likely be able to save the nation. We just have to get services. We have to have educated providers and clinicians, and we have to be open and willing to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have to trust in our community.
And you can start by investing in Melanated Social Work. Hit our Venmo, hit our Cash App. If you want to give us CEUs or give us other credentials and certifications, please feel free to invest in 4 Black and brown men that have licenses in social work. We're here to do the work. So thank you.
Good show.
All right.
All right, y'all.
Peace.
Peace.